Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Hi, Fidelma. It's late. Thanks for joining. Hope you're
You're
doing
welcome.
great.
You're welcome.
Hi, Simon. Thanks for being here. Hi, Anne. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining. Hi, Luann. Thank you for being here. Welcome, everyone. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. I'd love to know where you are today and maybe what organization or institution you're with. We've got quite a few folks here. Jody, Carolyn, Carrie, Rhonda, JR, Katie, Carrie, Henry Ta, how are you? Thanks for joining.
You just started.
Hey, Dante, thanks for joining. Thanks for being here. Welcome. Thanks, everyone, for introducing yourselves in the chat. I love seeing it. It's great to get a sense of where people are. Michael, big welcome to you. You know what we should have asked you to do is you could have shared where you are and the weather where you are, and then you can
Yes.
compare your weather with other people's weather. What's going on with your weather?
Yes, welcome everyone. I'm Mike Stebleton. I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota. And there's a major snowstorm happening right now. And we're expecting up to a couple feet. I know you probably don't measure snow in feet or inches. I don't know, JP, is it centimeters? How do you measure snow in Canada?
Well, we got a lot of different folks, so
Okay.
I
They're
think we
all
might have
over,
more
right?
non-Canadians than Canadians here. So you can measure snow however you want.
It's going to be a lot. In fact, they've canceled school for our kids for the next 3 days.
Okay.
So they're at home for 5 days, and you can imagine all of us as parents are gleeful about that.
Excited.
Yeah, I can only imagine. We've
It's
got
all
snow
good.
here.
It's all good. We're
We've
all
got some
safe.
snow.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad you're safe because that's
Yeah.
the thing. The roads, you want everything to be safe. We've got a little bit of snow in Ottawa. It's cold, but we're not shutting down the schools for 3 days. I can tell you that.
Okay. That's good.
And we should have not asked you for the weather in SoCal, but if 52 degrees is chilly for you, that's fine. That's fine. That's okay.
I had to wear a light sweater today.
Oh, poor you.
Where are you, Anne? In San Bernardino, it looks like. Okay.
The greater Los Angeles area.
So everyone's jumping in. We're a little bit over 30 right now. I'm asking everyone to introduce themselves in the chat, to share where you are, just so we get grounded. In the meantime, I'm going to start. I want to dive in because we've got a fascinating topic to talk about today. Our format for our webinar is a little bit different. Typically, I share content, and I like to share stories of members of the challenge mindset community. If this is your first time joining, let me tell you who this is. I've had the privilege of meeting many different folks who are passionate about helping people reach their potential. And through my network, I like having these sessions so we can talk about how to improve the world of career development. Many of the folks on this call use the challenge cards as a tool. Many of you are already familiar with it. So that's one of the ways that we're all tied together. But I think a common vision is that we want what's best for students when it comes to their careers. And when I started learning about the extended working life, the 7-year work life, 70-year work life, I thought this is something that we need to talk about more. The parents of the students that we're helping are not thinking about this, and I thought a great person to talk about this with is Michael Stebleton, who's with us on the call today. So, Michael, a huge welcome to you. Thank you for being here. I know that you've been thinking and talking about thinking and talking about this for a while. I just want people to know your formal role first. So I'm going to share that Michael is a professor of higher education in the Organizational Leadership Policy and Development Department at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. His research and teaching interests include career development, student development, student success, and persistence. And his current work explores the experiences of marginalized college and student populations. And I got to know Michael through a conference called the NCDA conference, National Career Development Association conference. And we've had a chance to collaborate a few times since then. And I thought this was a great excuse to get together and get your thoughts on this important topic. And we are planning on asking folks who are participating today for their thoughts on these issues. So we would love for you to participate through the chat, and also we'll have some formal questions for you along the way. So please feel free to use that that mechanism. Michael, do you like going by Mike or Michael today?
Mike is fine, JP.
Let's
That's
do Mike.
great. Yeah.
Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So how are you connected to this idea of the 70-year work life? What was the spark for you that drew you to think or talk and write about this?
Yeah, thanks, JP. I just want to acknowledge everyone and thank you for attending. I know we all live busy lives, and I appreciate you taking time today to join in this important conversation. And JP, thank you for the invitation. So I teach at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, as JP mentioned, and I work with undergrads and graduate students. I think my most engaging class is my undergrads. Don't tell the graduate students that, but my undergrads are primarily in the College of Education, and they're interested in human resource development areas and educational majors. And so they're required to take a class. That's how you get a captive audience, require the class. And the title of the course is The Changing Workplace. And so we look at the future of work, we look at trends, we look at different demographics, and we talk most importantly about how do we support students to prepare for these changes. So that's the context for our discussion today, and also my interest, JP, in your first question about this 70-year work life. And inevitably during the semester, we talk about this idea of career longevity, and how do we prepare our students to have multiple work roles, working through different organizations, sometimes gig work, sometimes contract work, as well as periods of unemployment. And so when we talk to students about their future work lives, I would say about half of them are kind of anxious about it, about sort of these ongoing persistent changes, these seismic shifts in work. And the other half are ready for it. They're geared up. They're excited about this constant change. They don't want to stay with one employer, one organization, or even one career for years or decades at a time. And so I started thinking about this 70-year work life throughout the context of this course, and came across a study out of the Stanford Center for Longevity called The New Map of Life. And they're predicting that the average kindergartner, so if you have a 5-year-old, at least here in the States, that's kindergarten years, there's a good chance that they will live to 105 years or longer, and have a work life of 60 to 70 different years, and have multiple roles under that time span. And so we'll talk more about what that means. It doesn't mean they're going to be working for 70 years straight, but work being one paid role is going to be present at various times throughout the course of their lifetimes. So that's a long introduction, but I wanted to provide some context, JP.
Yeah, thanks. That's useful. And it makes me think about why it's interesting for you, why it's interesting for others on this call. So I would love to know why everyone decided to join the webinar today. I assume it's because you're helping young people reach their potential and you want to know how this fits. Can you tell me more specifically, though? I'd love everyone to jump on the chat. I think we're about 40 folks. I'd love to read your answers. Just informally, why did you decide to come today? You could even share where you stand. Are you part of that half that Michael talked about for his class that's anxious? Are you part of the half that's ready? What kind of answers are you looking for? I'll start myself. I have a 4-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter, and I know that their future will look different than what my career trajectory looked like. So I have a vested interest in finding out what's best for them. I'd love to know for others, why did you decide to come today, and why are you interested in this topic? Feel free to share in the chat. I'm going to go with Carrie's answer first. Thanks, Carrie, for answering. I host a podcast called Paths and Progress for students to hear education, career path storytelling. I also teach FYE courses, first year experience courses,
Great.
where we talk about careers. I have a daughter who will be in kindergarten next. Okay, so kind of you've got both my interest and Michael's interest at heart. Future of Work Committee. Some folks are studying this. Thanks for sharing that, Michael. Undergrad, how this applies to midlife as well. A lot of people on this call might be working with adults as well. Thanks for bringing that up, Simon. So you're familiar with Stanford and some of their research. More talks about adults. Great. Okay, good. I can't read every single piece, but I will definitely after the call. But it's good to know a little bit why folks came here. So, Michael, I've got another question for you. I read a book called The 100-Year Life, which really sparked some changes in the way I see my life, my future, my career. What does it mean when we say the 100-year life, and why should we care?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, JP. And there are a number of authors that have been exploring this question, right, and this phenomenon of the 100-year life. And so I'm certainly not the first, but Michel Weiss, who does some consulting and speaking around this issue, wrote a book a couple of years ago that focused on long life learning, right? So some of us are familiar with the term lifelong learning, but she talks about long life learning, which really looks at this idea of being lifelong learners over the course of a lifetime. So she also takes some of these demographics and trends and statistics, and with advances in technology and hopefully healthcare, many of us, our kids, our grandkids will live to be, much longer and have healthier lives than all of us. And so when you think about what a career means in terms of how it's defined and how it is important in our lives, we should really care, right? And so one of my colleagues, and I think JP, Tristram Hooley, defines career as how we spend our time, right? So often we think of career as being our paid roles or our paid work or our day job. And really, Derek Thompson, who writes for the Atlantic Monthly magazine, says that our careers, our work, really only comprise about 1/8 of our lives. And so the other 7/8 are other life roles that we assume. And so I think, JP, we've talked about this before. When you talk about career, it's really a constellation of life roles, being paid and unpaid. And I was joking earlier that we're not all going to be working, our kids aren't all going to be working 60 or 70 years straight, but rather they're going to be balancing these different life roles, some paid, some non-paid. Some of us are doing childcare and elder care at the same time. And so we assume multiple roles, and we should really care about supporting, whether we're working with university students or mid-career individuals. It's balancing these life roles as they shift over time that becomes challenging, but also very rewarding. And I think as educators, as career development professionals, we have a role to support our clients or students in managing these roles. So that's why I think we should care, JP.
Yeah, it's you mentioned a couple of resources, which maybe what I'll do is I'll take the time to put them in a follow-up email, and I'll send in these. But one of the books you mentioned is Long Life Learning, which I just started last week on audiobook.
Okay,
that's
good.
Michel Weiss, and some provocative statistics in there. The other book that I mentioned was The 100-Year Life, and that I found a tremendous resource. For me, I have a ridiculous question I like to ask people. So, Mike, I'm going to ask you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
How old do you want to live until?
How old do I want to live? Like, you're looking for an exact number?
Maybe.
And am I in good health, or I am not in good health?
I got to tell you, first thing, if I can interrupt your train of thought, that is the question that maybe 75% of people, unofficial statistic, bring up when I ask them this question. That's at the heart of this. So I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer, but it's a
I'm
good
being
question.
a difficult subject.
No, not
here,
at all.
aren't
Not
I?
at all.
Yeah.
Most people ask this, have the same concern.
Yeah. I would say, assuming I'm in relatively good mental and physical health, I would say late 80s. Let's
Late
go with
80s.
88. Let's go with 88.
Let me share a personal anecdote that you might find interesting. I asked my family doctor, and she said early 70s. This shocked me.
For you personally?
For her.
Oh, for her, okay.
For her, this shocked me. I'll tell you my number. I chose 101. Okay, so that's what I'm working towards. But the day I decided that number, it was because of what I read in the 100-Year Life. And what the book was suggesting is that, will your life be different if you die at 72 or 112? And of course it is. And the thinking, one practical implication of that, which we might get into, is retirement. How much money do you need to save for retirement? It's very different if you need to save, for example, if you retire at 60 and for 12 years, or you retire at 60 and then you need to save till 112. It's very, very different numbers logistically. So once I picked 101, I started thinking more long term. And thinking more long term is a really useful skill for in career exploration, because if you are only thinking about the short term, you're missing out on the bigger picture. So to me, this longevity trend that we're talking about right now is a huge driver for this whole conversation. But I wanted to ask everybody else who's participating here, what other demographic or socioeconomic factors might influence the future of work? We just talked about one. People will live longer. What are the other factors that you know about, you suspect, you have a hypothesis that might impact the future of work? JR said automation. Brad said AI. To me, those could be connected. Multi-generational workforce. Yeah, and if I can add to that, Simon, a changing nature of how many people are in those different generational categories. AI, I think a lot of you on the call have had the chance to try Chat GPT. So you see today what impact that can have, but what impact will it have in 5 years, in 10 years? Another trend, the gig economy, shortage of workers. Yeah, that's important. Underrepresented groups. Yes, good point. The possibility for universal basic income. There's a lot of factors that could come in and change what the future of work can look like. So let me go to maybe asking you, Mike, for your advice. There's a lot of folks on this call that work with youth. They just want to know, like, how do we prepare them? There's a principal on this call that, she has her own kids and she's responsible for all of the welfare for all of these kids. I want to ask you, like, what advice or what we can do to prepare them. Maybe there are things from your syllabus, your curriculum in that class that you're teaching. And then after you share some advice, maybe I'm going to ask you about, well, who are today's youth? Like, how are they different? Because whatever messages and advice you'll share for them has to be tailored with who they are. So I'm interested in your point of view on both of those things.
And thanks, JP. Excellent questions. And maybe I'll start with the second one and lead back into the advice, because I'd like to start with a story and then maybe a statistic or two. A few years ago, I think it was the fall of 2018, I was with a colleague who was in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I was there for about 10 days doing some training around career development needs, working with some of the students and just leading some seminars. It was a wonderful experience. And at the end of one of these seminars with one of the student groups, it was a fairly large group, maybe 30, 40 students. A student came down as I was preparing to leave. And her name is Paula. And Paula said, can I ask you a question? And I was like, sure, of course. I thought she was going to maybe ask me what I thought of Messi or who my favorite soccer player was. I thought it was going to be a fairly simple question. And I was in for a surprise, JP. She said, she looked at me seriously, she paused, and she said, she was 20 years old, so about a junior at this small private university there. She said, how can we be so young, yet feel like we are running out of time? I'm just going to repeat that because it's pretty profound. It kind of shook me at the time, and I still sometimes wake up thinking about Paul in this question. She said, how can we be so young, yet feel like we are running out of time? And I'm sure I had a woefully miserable answer in that moment. But I think what she was trying to say at the time is that I think a lot of our students, grew up with maybe parents that were high achieving, or the expectation that they would exceed at a certain level. I think, JP, you talked about what's different or maybe unique. I think there's evidence to support K through 12, but also at the college level, that there's growing mental health issues. So rising prevalent rates of anxiety and depression. And so I think there's this, and then accelerated by the pandemic, of course. And so I think there's this growing pressure for students like Paula and others to feel like they need to get it right, however they define right is, and they need to start excelling and accomplishing those goals as soon as possible. And I didn't have a chance to really, have an extended conversation with Paula, but this was a high achieving student and had some very lofty goals. And I feel like she wanted to accomplish them as soon as possible before she sort of ran out of time, however she defined that. So I think that's a little bit different. Some of you that I know that are in higher ed spaces know that every year they ask the presidents and administrators of university, what are your most pressing concerns? And the last few years at the top, it's single-handedly been, addressing mental health needs of students, but also faculty and staff. And so there was a recent study that came out from our NASPA, which is our student affairs organization here in the States. And 72% of student affairs officials believe that campus mental health worsened this past year than previous years. And so that includes students, which is probably our most important group, but also faculty and staff. So it's a real growing concern. And of course, in terms of disparities, we know that different groups of populations experience mental health issues differently than others. And so there's contextual factors that need to be taken into consideration as well. To go to your first point, JP, was, how do we prepare students for the changes and the shifts? And you asked, what do I do in some of my conversations with my own students? I really challenge my students to be curious and to ask a lot of questions. Related to that, I encourage them to experiment as much as possible. And so with our undergraduate majors, we have a number of practicums and internships. I know a few of you on the call are involved in experiential education and first year seminars. That's some of my background as well that I share with you. Giving those students these trial opportunities to get involved, to ask questions, to talk to different people through informational interviews or short-term practicums is an excellent way to see what they're interested in, right? And JP, I know you've done work on the challenge mindset, and probably some of your participants know about, not focusing so much on your major, but what are the pressing concerns or problems that you want to try and address. And so I'm trying to urge my students also to just jump in, get involved, and don't be so worried about making mistakes, because they do have time, even though Paula and others sometimes feel like they don't. They do have time. So I'll stop there and just get your reaction, JP, or reaction from others.
Yeah, please feel free to add in the chat. Let me just play back some of the things that I heard. The recommendations you're making about curiosity, experimentation, celebrating mistakes. It sounds simple, because maybe some of the folks on this call, these are things that you already think and believe in and are sharing with students. But I have to say, for the student, I think these concepts, Mike, are a big contrast to where they are. And if you could help me, I'd like to come up with an opposing word for each one of those things, like some sort of antagonist that will reflect where they are. So let me just tell you why first. One helpful source and language and branding that I found for what we're describing as the opposite is from a book called Range by David Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
And he describes this as the cult of the Head Start. And what he means by the cult of the Head Start is thinking that our kids need to progress as quickly as possible on developmental milestones. And we need to specialize. We need to get them focused in, just like Tiger Woods learned, golf at the earliest age possible. We've assumed that a fast head start is the best path to success and happiness. And in this book, he challenges that notion to show that, in fact, maybe being a generalist, the opposite of a specialist, is the key to happiness and success. So the book has had a huge amount of success because there are a lot of folks raising their hand saying, that's me, I'm a generalist. Finally, someone is sharing the truth about how great I am. I'm only exaggerating a little bit, and I'm sorry if you said that after reading the book. I have a different point of view. I think being a generalist and a specialist is not a new label or a new brand that a student needs to choose. They're going to need to make 1,000 generalist and specialist decisions over the course of a 7-year career. But it does show the value of not specializing right away. So this is what I'm going to ask you, Mike, as a follow-up. I think when you share, be curious, experiment, and make mistakes, this is sort of the opposite in a way that some of these students are approaching their future. Am I right or wrong in looking at it that way?
You know, I think you're probably right. I'm familiar with Epstein's work. I put this citation in the chat as an excellent book. And you mentioned Tiger Woods. He also draws a comparison between Tiger Woods and Roger Federer, if there's any tennis fans out there. And Roger Federer played a lot of different sports when he was a young guy, and even into high school. And it wasn't until later that he specialized in tennis. And so he compares the two. And you know, I think in the past, there's certainly been a lot of pressure on young people to be more specialists, right? To declare that major and to focus in, whether it's a physical therapist or a surgeon or accountant or whatever it might be. And certainly some of those careers do require some early planning, right? In terms of, if you just think in terms of university, there's prerequisites and the professional program and the graduate level degree requirements. And so for students that are going that route, you do want to specialize. But I think more and more young people, and I think sometimes the parents are slower to come along than the students. They're realizing that it's safer, given these changes that we've outlined, to have a set of transferable skills that you can take in and out of different work positions. And when I'm working with my students, we're oftentimes talking about these generalizable or transferable skills that they're portable, right? JP, you can take them with them to different contexts or different work scenarios. And so I do think students are being more mindful of that. And in our majors, you know, we're working with students that are looking broadly at business and education careers. And so they do see themselves working more as generalists in many scenarios compared to some of the other majors on campus. I'm not sure if I answered your question or not, but I think it's shifting from this specialty focus. I have to be an expert. I have to be sort of at the top of my discipline versus this idea of being more of a generalist. And if you think about, you know, just in terms of the number of different job opportunities and industries that our future students will be working in, it's going to be an asset to have this generalist mindset, right? And so I think I'm talking to some of the career educators in the group that maybe work at a career services office. I think we spend a lot of time preparing our students for that first job out of university. And I think that's important, of course. But I think what we need to do is expand our horizons and really help students to prepare for the first job, but also the 10th job, the 20th job, and the 25th job, right? Because they're going to be hopefully very mobile and moving in and out of different work opportunities. So I'll stop there, JP, and get your reaction as well as others in the chat.
Sure. Well, a good example Stacy shared. I have a Bachelor's of Arts, a generalist degree. And then, you know, she got some jokes about that. And something similar happened to me, Stacy. I didn't say French fry cook for me, but with my undergraduate in psychology, I looked up what can I do with my major. That was my tool at the time. And it said manager of volunteers. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I was complaining about this to my buddy in philosophy. And he said, well, maybe I can be one of your volunteers. You know, that was going to be his career outcome. But Stacy, those skills in the Bachelor of Arts, as you know, these are some of the very important skills for the 10th, 25th job. And I've seen interesting research. I can't give you a source right away, but that shows, how liberal arts education catches up, those early gains made by maybe a STEM education where the salary would be higher right off the gate, but then, liberal arts would catch up. So it's an interesting thing to think about as we debate specialists versus generalists. I'm worried about the Paulas, Mike, who think they're running out of time. I've seen the same thing. To me, it feels like I'm running out of time to pick my one job title for the rest of my life. this is what you hear about in high school. All my friends have picked. It feels like that to them, right? But they've picked from a list of 10 job titles of what they wanted to do, and they're pigeonholing themselves, which is the opposite of this curiosity and experimentation that we want them to be doing. Dana mentioned seeing a trend in the importance of extracurricular activities versus work. And this, I'm interested, Dana, if you wouldn't mind following up on that, if you see that as a good or a bad thing. And for me, when I see people wanting to get involved in extracurricular activities, it's a good thing, being part of a community, building skills. However, there is a tremendous drop off in terms of young people who are working. And that's an important skill set that we can get from there. So it'd be interesting to know, Dana, what your opinion is on that. And then Fidelma, you said you just published a book on the gifted learner, how to help. Congratulations. Thanks for sharing that. That's an audience that they need often a different type of support that they may not get in the traditional schools.
Well, it's if I can speak, Michael,
Please, yeah.
that speaks to the girl that Michael spoke about there, the question she asked, because I studied 19 gifted learners and they put incredible pressure on themselves. Nothing is enough. And they then go into this, can go into this perfectionist loop. And that fear of failure is incredible for them. So they actually really do need career guidance. Like there's one case study, or there's 2 or 3 case studies actually, that absolutely decry the lack of career guidance in their lives and how damaged they felt as a result. And even though some of the people I've interviewed are now in their 40s and they're still angry about it. So it can be, it's very meaningful to do this for young people, for sure.
Some great moments I've had, Fidelma, in career coaching are when people say, I wish someone would have told me this when I was younger. When I take out the cards, and I'm sure when you do, the magic that you do, someone says, I wish someone would have told me. And I know we're all working hard on integrating careers and changing the system. Okay, Brad shares the difference between soft skills and hard skills. That's the language we used previously. I've heard all sorts of new names, the human skills, and they're all skills. And when I was in my previous career in industrial organizational psychology, our consulting company rated skills and ranked them based on how easy or difficult they were to develop. So this is very related to what you just said, Brad, and it's a good thing to keep in mind that some skills are easier or harder to develop. And Carolyn, I think the quote "running out of time" came from just a personal story from Mike, a student that he met at the time. Michael shares the book The Adaptation Advantage, with Simon has read. I read that one as well, and I thought it was fantastic. Okay, great, thanks. And Dana, following up, before my next question, I don't think it's a good thing to focus on extracurricular activities. Yes, they can provide college funding, but how do they know what type of work they would want with no work to reflect on? There needs to be a balance. That's aligned with my point of view, Dana. I think there's a missed opportunity for teenagers to be working more. So many of them are told, don't work, focus on your grades. And there's a downside to that. Mike, you think so much about these issues and about, the future of career education. You decided to put together a book, which is a huge, massive undertaking. First of all, tell us why did you decide to do something like this? How long did it take you? And maybe what was your biggest surprise as you were completing the project?
Sure. Thank you, JP. So I need to give credit where credit is due. I'm the third of 3 authors, or I should say co-editors, on this book called Mapping the Future of Undergraduate Career Education. And it was published by Routledge. It came out last summer, but it's got a 2023 copyright date, so it's relatively new. And so the lead author is a colleague of both of ours, JP, Melanie Buford. Melanie is a teaching specialist here at the University of Minnesota. She also happens to be one of my star PhD students in the higher education program. And so we connected a couple of years ago, and she came to me with the idea. And she has a background in career development. She worked at the University of Cincinnati and was a faculty member there. and came to the University of Minnesota about 2.5 years ago. And she saw a gap, right? She saw a need in the career space where she wanted to come up with a collection of chapters from different diverse authors and really address some of the pressing needs in career development. And so part of the book addresses many of the issues that we talked about in terms of shifts and demographics and trends in career and career development and the way we work, but also issues related to mental health and career development and how those two are integrated and shouldn't be separated. She also talks a lot, or we talk a lot about social justice and diversity, equity, inclusion issues. I know some of you mentioned your interest and commitment around DEI. And so we wanted to make sure that that was a theme that was present in the text. And the third area was really looking at new and innovative paradigms in terms of approaching career and career development. So we've got some chapters on narrative approaches. JP, a little shout out to you. You've got a chapter in there on the challenge mindset. We have another chapter on life design. You know, some of you probably are familiar with the design principles out of Stanford, Burnett and Evans, who talk about designing your life. And so those are some of the key components and contributions. You asked about the challenge, right? The challenge of putting this together, JP?
Yeah, I can only imagine because
Yeah,
you a lot of
fortunately
thought
I
on it.
was just the third guy, right? So I kind of stood back and said, Melanie, you're doing a great job. No, seriously, the biggest challenge was organizing and communicating with over 20 different authors. And so I think one of the assets or features of the book is that we've got authors who are scholars or teachers or faculty members, but then the bulk of our chapter authors are working in the field. So they're entrepreneurs, they're educators that are working in university or other nonprofit organizations. And so we've got a really strong mix of what I would say the scholarly with the practice, and we try to embed that throughout the chapters of the text. So the biggest challenge was, I think, just organizing it. And fortunately, Melanie was taking the lead, so I wasn't too worried.
That's good. Yeah, and
Yeah.
she's fantastic. So I'm glad you had a good person on the at the head of that project. And maybe just to know about the book itself, if anyone's curious, why should someone read this book? And maybe you've already gotten feedback from readers. What kind of feedback are you receiving about the book?
Yeah, excellent question. And I think, I think I alluded to maybe one feature of the book that might differentiate the text from other titles out there. And there are a lot of career development titles. And oftentimes they're in two different camps. The one is sort of the career development college textbook that's very scholarly, usually written by a faculty member or a team of scholars. On the other side of the continuum, there's the career development workbook that's very practice oriented, involves a lot of self-reflection activities. We found that there wasn't a lot in the publication space that did both, and so we tried to really have the scholarly focus, but then also the practice. So we have a list of recommendations for practitioners at the end of every chapter. So I think that's a contribution. I do think some of the issues that we've talked about today are probably another reason to possibly pick up this book. It sounds like blatant self-promotion, but I think some of the contributions are around the mental health issue, and I know that's a growing interest. In the past, when I was going through my counseling psychology program years ago now, probably decades ago, we won't do the math on that, but there was a group of us that were interested in career and working in academic issues, and then there was a group that were interested in mental health issues, and like the mental health therapists to be often didn't see the value in taking the career development courses and whatnot. So we kind of we all got along, but there's sort of this philosophical difference in terms of what does career mean to your life. And I think there's a greater understanding now that career is very, it's part of our lives. It's very personal. And so you shouldn't separate career issues from sort of more mental or personal health issues. The other piece, or the other, contribution that I would consider is really looking at, the issues of social justice and equity. And, Melanie and I started talking about this when she first introduced the book. And she wanted, and I also wanted the writings to reflect diverse populations, right? So we know that historically, a lot of the career texts, the theories, even the foundational concepts of our profession were largely built on white Western men, right? And so the initial studies were done on, men at Harvard University back in, the 50s and 60s, which is not representative at all. And so we really wanted to push up against some of these kind of more sort of traditional or historic notions of career and what career means. And so we've got different international perspectives in there. We address, many of the issues that are BIPOC individuals are experiencing individually and collectively. And so I think that might be another contribution worth exploring in this text.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And I
Yeah.
think it's such an important project that you all put together, and thanks for doing it. I mean, it's a project for a niche audience, but it's a great audience. These are the folks that I get to meet and speak with, and maybe some of the folks that are on the call. And when I think about who would join a webinar like this one at this time, the level of commitment and passion that you've got for what you do, it's remarkable. How can I say this delicately? Your colleagues may not always match your passion. That's my assumption. And that's why I think this book is so important. And I want to give you a specific example. I got such positive response from putting out this webinar on my LinkedIn and in my email newsletter. But I did get some messages that, I would say were resistant. And I want to read one response to the group about one person's reaction to hearing about this concept of the 70-year work life. And obviously I've hidden their name, but I wanted to share what they wrote in their response. To be honest, the idea of a 70-year work life sounds absolutely horrific. We already have problems with work-life balance. This sounds like just another corporatist scheme to keep us all chained to the wheel for as long as possible. Not interested. And I could tell this person, didn't like the topic, but I had a lot of questions. And I wrote back and to find out, well, is it that you don't believe in, these trends, extended work life? Is it because, you think that this is something that's going to companies will take advantage of? And unfortunately, this person unsubscribed to my mailing list because of this webinar. So I didn't get a response, but I do respect the emotions that person must have felt, when they got my message. And I just wanted to, maybe I'll ask you, Mike, and anybody else can chime in. Is this a typical reaction from folks? Like when you talk about, 100-year life, 70-year work life, is this something we should expect? And if so, how do we work around it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And JP and I, were emailing about this yesterday, and he kind of got my reaction. And, I kind of had to chuckle because I've never been called a capitalist, right? But probably called a lot of other things by students and others, but never a capitalist. And this was the second time when I first published this blog around the 70-year work life. Someone wrote in there, you're a capitalist. So JP, I'm wondering if it's the same person or if there's two of them out there that are after our ideas. But anyway, that's fine. That's why we have these types of discussions, is to encourage divergent perspectives and viewpoints. And so I don't get that a lot, to answer your question, but I do think maybe where that individual might have been coming from is, and I wish that person would have attended, because I think this is the type of person that needs to hear this message, ironically. But when you think about career and the way we define it, right, as this constellation of life roles, it makes sense that if we're going to be living longer, we're going to have 60 or 70 years where paid work is going to be one aspect of our constellation, right? That's going to be at least one of our roles. And so when I originally, and it's not even my original idea, because this is built on the work of others and thoughts of others, is that, we're going to be living longer, but we're also going to be assuming other roles along with paid work. And so how do we best manage that, knowing that at times it's going to be, challenging? And if we're going to be swirling in and out of work, Michelle Weiss, who talks about lifelong learning, talks about it as a spiral staircase, right? So if you've ever been on one of these big spiral staircases, they kind of go round and round. And what she seems to say with that metaphor is that we're going to be engaging in different work contexts throughout this period of time. And so I try to see it positive rather than negative. Now, of course, JP, that goes back to, you know, whether or not you have full mental and physical capacities or capabilities. But my hope is that people see this as an energizing, positive opportunity to be a generalist and to engage in different ways, knowing that some of this working life might be and will be contributing to non-paid work roles, which will probably be more important than just the paid roles. So I'm not sure if I answered your question. Maybe I dodged it, but I don't get that a lot. But I'm curious. I hope this person engages with one or both of us, because I'm curious as to what other perspectives they might have.
Sure. And when I wrote back, I referred to some resources as well. So
Yeah,
we'll see. I've got two things I want to do before we wrap up our time together, Mike. Number one is I want to ask you about recommendations you have for any career professionals, anything we should stop, start, or continue to do. I know you've shared quite a few already, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that. I also wanted to ask participants if they had questions for you, for me, or for each other, and we can use the chat. And
sure.
just before you share those recommendations with us, Mike, I've got a few comments in the chat that I'd love to address. Stacy, I think you've gotten some ideas so far about, you know, what do you do when a student wants to be a pro athlete or a popular singer? And in this case, I'm going to share my point of view, my approach, Stacy, to how I do this with students. I consider their dream to be like a wave that they're surfing on. And I first encourage them to go deeper into the dream. So instead of holding them back and talking about the obstacles and challenges, I do the opposite. I get them to double down. And it's during the double down that they start to feel empowered and build self-efficacy. And they start to scratch at the why. Why do I want that? And sometimes there's nothing there. You know, there's no why. Or sometimes there's a why that's different than they originally anticipated. That's when things get interested. And then the second step after we double down on the dream is to work backwards. What does it take to get there? For a pro athlete, how long do they train? What are the milestones? What are the steps? And in some cases, it's a sobering exercise for them to realize I'm not willing to do what it takes to get to that goal. But the difference is that they came up with that conclusion versus me. So that's my point of view. And I hope that's useful food for thought as you craft your point of view. Next, Ashraf shares that, you know, if you do a degree, by the time you're done your degree, what the requirements, you know, might be in a specific field might change. And Brad says that's why there needs to be a balance with stackable credentials. And there needs to be a balance between, you know, skills that they can use for that 10th job and the first job, I believe. And then Ashraf goes on to talk more about the balance between how you learn when you work as an entrepreneur, how you learn when you're studying. So thanks. This makes the conversation way more engaging, you sharing your thoughts and your comments in the chat. And Simon asked a good question here. How do we pace careers differently? And he actually wrote that, Simon, before you talked about the staircase, Mike. So I feel like it's a really useful take on the pace, moving in and out of paid and unpaid work. If you wanted to elaborate on that, Mike, feel free. But let's leave it at that for now. And then I'd love, Mike, if you can share your recommendations with us.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, JP. And thanks to everyone who's writing in the chat. Some of you are offering some really thoughtful insights, and hopefully, JP, we can save some of this, because I know some of you, I think it was Brad, that has a podcast and you're sharing other resources. So I want to encourage you to reach out to me, because I'm always a learner as well. So feel free to stay connected with me. Yeah, in terms of resources, I've been dropping some of my favorites in the chat. I'm reading this book by Steve Cadigan, who worked as a VP of HR for LinkedIn. And he's got this wonderful book called Workquake, which is really engaging. You know, one of the challenges with these books that come out now is that, you know, when you're talking about workplace trends or AI or technology, they're out of date by the time that they actually get published. And so you always have to have that caveat. I mentioned McGowan and Shipley, the adaptation advantage. I know Simon gave a shout out on that one as well. I think they're coming out with another book within the next 6 months called the empathy advantage, which sounds really engaging. If it's as good as the adaptation advantage, that would be worth picking up. I've been reading some information or some new work around career shocks, this concept called career shocks, and in particular, Ackerman's. I can send that to you, JP. I don't know if I have it in front of me right now, but this idea of the pandemic being a career shock for all of us, and depending how we reacted to it, whether positively or negatively or both, that can help us make sense of our careers or career trajectories. So I've been doing some work around career shocks with students. Some of you I know are familiar with Design Your Life by Burnett and Evans. That's been out for a while. I think it's a 2016 copyright date on that. And then in terms of just kind of, related to technology and workplace issues, I follow Derek Thompson, who writes for the Atlantic Monthly. He has a podcast called Plain English that addresses a lot of workplace issues. So I'm a fan of Thompson's work. And then finally, some of you might be familiar with Adam Grant. Adam Grant's an organizational psychologist out of Penn, and he has a podcast called Rethinking. It's a TED production. And he has a book that came out about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago now, called Think Again. So it encourages us to kind of re-envision or think and question long-held beliefs or assumptions that we've held in the past. So I know that's a lot. Some of them I've dropped in the chat. If any of those sounded of interest to you, feel free to reach out to me or JP, and we can get you those references.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that. I'll get it organized, and I've got a list of everyone's emails just based on your Eventbrite sign up. So I'll send a follow-up email with those book titles and articles. So here's the best time to pause for questions, comments, reactions from the audience. If you've asked a question in the chat that we haven't answered yet, would you mind bumping it back up? Because that would be quite useful. Michael, I love the question. What's the number one competency attribute that students might have to succeed? Not because we have to pick just one, but that type of questions, it forces you to distill like what's most important. And so I like it. And I picked adaptability for some of the reasons that we mentioned before. A lot of things will change. I love the story about how, the TV show hosts on Good Morning America talked about the internet the first time. They couldn't read an email address. What does the @ mean? What is the internet anyway? They sounded so silly. That is how we sound today about some of the emerging technologies that are around us. And that, humble reminder is really useful because it reminds us how much things will change in the future. And that's why I think adaptability is very important. So, final thoughts, questions. I'm seeing some folks add their number one attribute, agility, attitude. I like that. I've been hearing the word mindset. I need to compare the difference of mindset and attitude, because I like both of those words to help prepare young people for the future. Bravery, courage, that's great.
These are all good, JP.
You approve?
I do. This is an A-level class, I can tell.
Okay, great. Love attitude. That's great. Okay, well, I want to say a huge thank you, Mike, for taking the time out of your schedule and your snowstorm to hang out with us and share your reflections on creating your book and on tackling these important issues with students. Certainly an ongoing conversation, and I appreciate you making the time.
Of course. Thank you, JP, for having me, and thank you all for participating and spending some time with us today.
Thank you. A quick plug for our next webinar in 1 month. I'll be sending out the date soon in another email. Most of you are already on the mailing list, but it's very related to what we're talking about today on March 21st, we're going to be talking about the power of Chat GPT in career exploration. If you're lucky, you might have seen some posts on LinkedIn about how to use Chat GPT for your career exploration to build resumes. I've received a lot of messages from our universities that use the challenge cards, stories about how students are using them, are using Chat GPT to find companies that work on the challenges they care about, to find people, to find required knowledge. It's a tool that really, I think, can take career exploration to a whole other level. And I'm going to be sharing some very, very practical tools and exercises that you can try out immediately. So that's going to be next month, and I hope you can come then. And I hope you can come with your stories about how you've used Chat GPT successfully or not so successfully to add to the learning. But in the meantime, huge thank you for everyone for making the time, and we'll see you in a month.
Thank you,
Thanks,
JP.
everyone.
Yep.
Thank you. Take care. Bye, everyone. Bye, Carolyn. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here. Bye. Hi, Joan. Bye, Michael. Thanks for being here. Bye, Henry. Thanks, Jeffrey, for waking up so early. I'll send you the recording. Bye, Kevin.